I'm going to demonstrate cutting out a corrugated structure. This is for project 2, the DTC project, where it's direct to consumer. So the reason the corrugated material is going to be used for this particular structure, it is going to go through the mail. So it's going to get pretty beat up, so it needs to be strong enough to withstand going through the mail. This particular structure is not designed to protect anything fragile. I mean, corrugated board is great for protecting, glass bottles and things like that, because we can make the internal parts of the structure very protective, which is good. This particular one is more about protecting itself and not crushing. Like, we wouldn't be able to make a structure like this out of box board because it would break. And FedEx and UPS, they don't allow that kind of structure to be mailed. So this is a corrugated structure. This is what I'm going to demonstrate. This is a fake brand. It was just set up so it's a dietary supplement, and it's designed to hold these wallets that have these tablets in it. So this is a weekly supply of tablets. So this structure would come to the consumer, and I'm going to have 4 wallets in it. So it's the consumer would have this package for approximately a month. So that's also a good part of the durability of this. So it's this nice little wallet. All the graphics are on the inside, which really works well for DTC packaging, direct to consumer. And then when you fold it up, the outside is nondescript. This particular one, since it is a dietary product, it's kind of personal. We don't want to have that all over the outside of the package. So that'll be very neutral. And then of course the box is sized so it accommodates the label nicely on the outside. So that's the structure we're going to work with. So like I had mentioned, this is going to be made out of e-flute. I am going to provide this little ring of materials where I have some of the box board and the chipboard, and then I have 3 samples of the fluted material. We're going to be using e-flute, which is the thinnest. Since this is not a large box, it's very small, e-flute will work out very well. I'm also going to, in the samples here, I have a sample of B flute and C flute, which are thicker flutes. So when I keep saying flute, we're talking about that edge. When you look at that, there's a piece of material in there that goes back and forth and creates those flutes, and that's called corrugation. So we can see the different thicknesses. Now, E is very, very thin. Now, it's quite a nice material for making small structures like that. So everybody will have this. They know exactly what the thicknesses of the materials are. So in E-flute, since we have any of the fluted boards, we have these. We definitely have they call it a grain. There's a direction. It's hard to see here, but when you look at it closely, you can see the fluted pattern on the outside of the material. And that is a very definitive grain direction. We need to be very aware of that. That's the big distinction of corrugation versus box board, because we're going to be doing folds in both directions. And some folds will go against the grain. They will go against those flutes, and some will go with the flutes. So I just want to demonstrate the 2 different kinds. When you go against the flutes, that is a very strong fold, because you're crushing those little tubes in there and folding it. So it's a really nice, strong fold. When you fold with the flutes, it's a little weaker, because you're kind of fitting in between, or you're crushing one of the tubes in one of the flutes in one direction. So let's just take a look at that here. So I have this is going with the flutes. So unlike box board, where I'm providing that scoreboard for you to make the folds, here we're more or less denting the material. We're not going to do a similar kind of a score like that. So you can use several things. This is the dowel that I provided with the scoreboard, and I wouldn't use the chiseled end. I would just use the end here, and you can run along that way. You can also use a pen or any kind of a blunt edge like this, where it's not so sharp. So let's just use that for now. So you can line up, give yourself a little bit of tolerance. Now, when you're going with the grain, you don't want to press too hard. I'm going to show you what happens when you press too hard. You end up actually tearing the material. So I'm just going to go along here nice and easy, just to create a nice little dent, a subtle little dent, and I'll get a nice fold there. And the material will crush in. We're not creating a bead like with box board. The material will force in, and we'll get a nice exterior edge. So this is a fold that's going with the fluting. So it turns out now E-flute folds really well in both directions. When you get to the bigger flutes, it sometimes is a little clumsy. So that fold is in that direction. Here I have these measurements. Now this fold is going to go against the flutes. So just by doing the same thing, we're going to create a nice little, you can hear that, listen to that. I'm going over those flutes and it makes that kind of vibration sound. Here, you can press a bit harder because we're gonna be going against all those flutes, and that folds very nicely. That's a nice strong fold, because that fold will go exactly where I want it, because I'm going going across the flutes. Sometimes when you go with the flutes, since these are so tiny, it's very subtle, but sometimes the fold wants to go in between the two flutes, so it might get a little shaky. And sometimes, like in this particular situation, I want this fold to go in both directions. And I'm gonna be doing my hinge with the flutes, and I'll show you how that works. So, gotta keep track of those two things. And let me just demonstrate going with the flutes, and I'm gonna go a little too hard. Let's see if it even does it. It's not doing it. Sometimes it breaks through the material. It's not doing it. And sometimes, here it goes, a little bit. If I go a little too hard, the material might start to rip. Now in a little handmade mock-up like this that's really small, I mean, that can be kind of unsightly, but just to do a functioning example to test everything works, don't stress about that. But when you get to a more final comp, you really don't want that tearing to happen. So you need to be careful when you're creating your score with the grain. Do a little bit lighter. Against the grain, you can be much tougher on that to get that to work. So everything else is very similar to the other boxboard construction for the folding cartons. So this is the die line that I had created for this structure. You can go to the print room and get it done and get it printed. This I tiled. This is easier. Instead of running around trying to get something printed, I just tile it and tape it together, because a lot of these are quite often just tests. It's very iterative. I've done this 2 or 3 times now. So it's just quicker for me to just print these out, cut them up, tape it together, test my structure, because the chances are I'm probably going to be doing it again anyhow. So I'd like to be able to just do everything right here. So what we need to do is when we have this ready to go, I use this repositionable spray. So all I want to do is just lightly spray the back of this and then stick it to the E-flute. This is going to be the inside of our structure. All my die lines are of the inside, because I like to keep the outside nice and clean. I don't want to have I don't want to have the residue from the adhesive or any pencil lines or anything like that. So I do everything on the inside. So to get this, I need to get this die line on the E-flute corrugated lined up with the fluting exactly the way I want it. I can't just randomly put this on there. With boxboard, we can. Boxboard does have a grain direction, but we don't have to worry about that as much. There is a grain, and in production, they do care about how that, but for our samples, it's okay. But for fluted material, we definitely need to line this up, because I am gonna have the fluting. I picked a direction. I want my flutes to run this way. I want the lines to run this way, because I have all these folded edges and my locking tab that holds the whole box together. I want to have the fold go against the grain, because I want those to be really nice and very accurate folds, so when it comes together, it locks. So every structure is going to be different, but we need to make that decision first. And the reason I'm doing that is I trimmed this right along the edge of my die line. Everything else is sort of random. So I'm going to line that edge up with the edge of the cardboard, so then I know my fluting is exactly correct. So here's a sample of this. This piece of, I started cutting it so I can move this along quickly. So this is the fluting on here. I want the fluting direction to run this way, like I had mentioned. So these folds will go against the flute. So I looked at it, made sure it lined up, and I lined this edge up after I put the spray adhesive on it. I lined that up perfectly on this nice squared piece of cardboard and then laid everything down. So now I know my flutes are very accurate. And it's good because I want to cross over the flutes here, but I want these to line up. If the fluting pattern was slightly off, these folds would be not very accurate, because it wouldn't line up. I want those to line up with the flutes, and I want these to go across. So you'll see that when you start to interact with this material, it makes a big difference. So I started cutting this out. So I'm just going to finish cutting this out. I'll show you how this folds. This is a hand setup, no glue. This whole thing sets up without any glue joints, which is very interesting. So again, it might take a couple of passes. This is E-flute, so it's relatively dense. But it's a really nice material. I really love working with E-flute. The bigger flute patterns are good and they have their benefits. They're just a little less refined. Okay, got that one. So you can see some of my little steps and adjustments here for material thicknesses. So we have to account for those. Pull this one here. I have all 4 of those. Okay, that's good. So these can be done relatively quickly. Once you set up your die line and you print that out and mount to the board. What's nice about this process versus doing a bottle design, these are as close to a prototype as you can get quickly by hand. When I fold this up and it works, it is as good as a prototype, which is quite nice. Unlike a bottle where you can do a 3D print or a CNC machine part, it's still fake. It's still a simulation of what's going on. So curves, let's do these by hand. Again, keep your hands away from the path of the blade. I have found the E-flute usually, sometimes I can do it in one pass, but then I have to press really hard. Okay, I have one more cut here. Let's make sure that that's, okay, so we're all set. So that's my outline, and all these internal lines are folds. We do have this one cut here, that this tab, when this is folded up, that tab is gonna go inside, and that's what holds the entire structure together. Now, I've been playing with this dimension, so I have this at about 2 3/8. And I've been adjusting this and I haven't gotten it perfect yet. Let's see here. Right, to 2 3/8, and I'm slightly in from that edge. So I think what I'm gonna do is, I'm gonna make a slight adjustment here. Kind of doing this on the fly. I'm gonna bring this material back slightly here in all 4 of these locations. Because we want that to be a nice tight fit, and I've been slightly off. So here I am doing a little bit of last minute designing on the fly, which is perfectly fine. We'll see if that works. So let's say if that does work, I'll remember to go back to my die line and make that adjustment. If it doesn't work, then I need to make another attempt. And since those are going in there, I don't have these on here. These would ultimately be radius little corners. So I'm not gonna get too critical about that. You're not gonna see those. Those are more of a functional thing for setup. So when the setup goes in there, we want those tabs to go in. So we'll see how all that works. So I'm just gonna cut off those little corners to get that to go in there a little bit more easily. Okay, so now I'm going to cut these. This space will represent approximately 2 thicknesses of material. So E-flute is approximately 90 thousandths, give or take. I want that to be a nice tight fit. So I'm just making some last minute decisions. I think I'll cut just slightly to the outside of that line. And I think we should be in pretty good shape. I might have to force that in a little bit, but I really want to make sure that that's a nice tight fit. So now, sometimes these cuts don't go all the way, so I'm just going to get that to go and push out that material. So that's that slit that will hold that together. Love that sound, cutting right through those flutes. E-flute is very nice material to work with. Okay, so that's that cut right there. So now we just have to do all the scoring and the folding. So I'm going to use the pen to do all that. So like I had mentioned, these folds are with the grain. So I'm going to do them all at the same time, and I'm going to be careful not to go too far. I have that extra piece of paper with my die line in there, so I have a little bit of protection. So I'm going to take that nice and easy because I do not want to rip through the material. I'm going to keep that nice and clean, especially in here, in this kind of the bookbinding corner, because that we will see when we open that up. So if that's all torn and ripped, it will not look as nice. So I'm not pressing too hard, just enough to get that to fold. And like that. Now these are going against the grain. So here I can go a little bit more. I'm gonna press pretty hard because I want that fold to really bend nicely. Okay. So there'll be no glue time. It'll just be a matter of folding these and set this up in position. Okay, so I can even start to, they call it breaking the edge, just sort of fold that, make sure that's working. That looks like that's working pretty well. Just nice and easy, lift that up. These are the folds that are a little bit more, that's not, maybe I missed that. That didn't fold, so I might go back, just give that a little bit more. There we go. Okay, so those are the more challenging ones because they are folding with the fluting. I want to make sure that these other ones are going to probably fold very nicely because they're snapping across the direction of the flutes. That's the main difference between the folding carton in just regular chip and then working with fluted material. I mean, they're all folding cartons, I understand that. I should be able to just peel this up. A little bit too much spray, but not bad. It comes right off. Okay, so that's it. So now I can really extend these a little bit further. So if you remember when we open this box up, I have these two folds, which are these. They go past, they go back, and that's how you access that. So it needs to go in both directions. So I want to make sure that stays very accurate. So I am going to, just going to make a little tick mark here. I'm going to press that from the other side and make sure that that fold stays really clean. I don't want it to break, tear, or fold irregularly. So I'm going to press that from this side also. So now I'm pressing from both sides to keep that really clean. So obviously the box is not going to be made this way in production. This is just for us to make handmade samples. In production, it'll be a die line. It'll be a press, just like in the box boards. And it'll give us enough force to get that to fold accurately. Okay, so that's good. So that's going to fold in both directions nicely. Okay, the rest of this is ready to go. I call it hyper folding. We want to just fold it over 90 degrees so it sits nice because we are doing this by hand, so I don't have enough pressure to make that as much as a regular die cut. I'm folding those all in position. We have this. Okay, that's a little bump. There it goes. Okay, try to get that as nice, as clean as possible. Again, I'm just hyperextending these folds. This particular E-flute has white on both sides, obviously. It's very clean. It's very nice for handmade mock-ups. I also have it in white one side, craft on the other side, and then also craft both sides. Sometimes we want these to have a nice craft finish to it. Okay, so that's the die line. So what would happen in production is this would be printed, die cut, scored, and flat. And they would stack these up and bundle them. And the producer of the package would then ship those to fulfillment. Fulfillment would take that and they would bring it into their equipment. And this particular one would be a hand setup. But they might have jigs, they might have like a template. So they would take it off and they might have like walls. So all I'd have to do is push this in, it would make some folds, and I would do it by hand. So there's a lot of fulfillment requirements that would occur at the same time. So how this sets up is you bring this in, and you bring this across the top, and this gets snapped into position. So what's happening, okay, it's a little tight. So what's happening is that's creating the divider. So that has a double function to it, which is quite nice. Okay, so there's that little cut, slightly tight. Maybe a little more than slightly. Okay, there we go. So that holds this pretty square. That's how the box is assembled. So that's essentially it. And that happens twice. This cut I made a little bit bigger so I could see how that's gonna look. And it's a little wide. So I'm gonna fix that right now. Let me see how this one is. Okay, so these I didn't bring in enough. I'm just gonna bring that in just a little bit more. So again, I know that's a little bit of a sensitive area there. So that will be, I will go back to my die line and make that adjustment. That's why it's nice to have that die line in the 3D file or in an Illustrator file, depending on how you construct that. So we can go back and make those modifications and keep track of how we're doing that. Okay, so I'm reaching in here and pulling that off essentially like that so I can get the other one in there. So those tabs coming in, they curving in, they want to open up. But having them next to one another, they keep each other in position. So it's a nice little detail about how that works. So now this folds like this. I have a little extra clearance. So I have some space here. So this is not folding accurately. I mean, it's folding accurately, but the pressure on those seams need to be hyperextended a little bit. So I can go back and do that. So that's the structure. So once this is put together, and you put a tape seal on here, this is very strong. So we have multiple walls and folds holding this together, and you can't open this. You can't pick these open because they're locked in here. So it's like an interlock. So once it's opened, yes, you can take it apart. But if you keep it sealed, and it'll be sealed with the tape and then mailed, it can't be tampered with unless you break that seal. So this works really well, and it's very, very, very strong because we have all these walls and folds together. So it works pretty well without any glue. So again, for the art part, these are just art components that I made. I didn't put art all over the entire die line. I just made these little pieces and kind of glued them into position. So this is still a mock-up, but it's a good way to start to look at how the art presents itself in the structure. And obviously you can test how these things fit. So that particular one had all the tablets. These are just fake. So I'm just folding up a folder to simulate what the rest of these would look like. And then they fit inside. So this particular design, again, it's a month supply of these tablets. So there would be a little brochure that explains how everything is working. And the graphics on the inside are more of a unboxing experience. Again, to reinforce your decision to buy this product. You've already bought it, it came in the mail, so you're already convinced about how it works. And this graphics is just a continuation of that experience, so that'll be your unboxing experience. And again, folds over and it's sized to fit the label. So that's the assembly of a corrugated structure.